Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Bella Gamer, and we're back with more Cosmere content. This time talking about another Radiant Order, and in fact, I picked this particular video, or at least this particular Radiant path, because someone in the comments mentions that they got a Radiant Order on Brandon Sanderson's website, and they're like, I'm kind of interested with my order, how it plays in the game. So if you want to see your order, talk about it in the comments, because if a lot of people are talking about a particular Radiant path, then obviously I'm going to want to cover it. And it's kind of convenient for me because Skybreaker shares one of its surges with Dustbringer, and that would be Division. So, that being said, I kind of already know half of what this kit is about, and that's very convenient for me. But let's talk about the Skybreakers. So, Skybreakers, well, actually, we can't really talk about the Skybreakers without getting into a little bit of spoilers, most specifically for Book 3, I do believe. So if you don't want to be spoiled at all, now's the time to kind of dip out. But if you read up through Oathbringer, then at the very least, nothing here should seem too spoilery, I believe, anyway. I'm not quite a Cosmere head as many people are, but I did read the books earlier this year. So with that warning out of the way, let's talk about Skybreakers. So Skybreakers, which, by the way, love the art and love the armor for it. So here's a generic Skybreaker, are essentially flying paladins. I mean, technically, not all Radiants are flying paladins, but all Radiants are knights, and so have oaths and such to keep. But more specifically, the Skybreakers are the lawful individuals. I wouldn't say lawful good. They could be lawful good, but they could also just be true lawful or even lawful evil, depending. Now, of course, Cosmere doesn't have such alignment circles, but if that's what you're familiar with, if you play D&D, for instance, then you'll get what I'm meaning. So the Skybreakers are all about justice. Their philosophy is, I will seek justice. And more or less the philosophy section here talks about that the Skybreakers will do their best to ensure laws are established to prevent anarchy, but to also prevent tyrants from abusing the law for the greater, or so everyone can live, better under the laws. So Skybreakers inherently, at least as like a core base of the idea of a Skybreaker, is you are a agent of the law and you serve the people whom those laws serve. So your whole idea is, bringing justice wherever you go. That's kind of the gist of the Skybreakers. But there's actually kind of a division in the Skybreaker ranks, at least in canon. So there's the core Skybreaker group formed by Nail the Herald, which is the most law-focused, to-the-letter organization you can imagine. And they go a pretty wild route throughout the books. But they are so restricted that even after speaking the first ideal, you don't get to breathe Stormlight. In this little nifty section here, you can actually see that the Skybreakers, if you're going by canon, have specific rules, at least if you're following Nail's order of Skybreakers. And you get different things after you speak different ideals. So at the first ideal, you don't get the ability to breathe Stormlight, but your maximum HP increases by 1 per level. And when you speak your first ideal, actually, like after you take the talent and then get your requisite points, then you become empowered in the scene and you gain a maximum and current focus increase based on your current tier. And then whenever your tier increases by 1 step, you increase those by 1 as well. So overall, starting off as a Skybreaker, you would have 0 powers, but I will say if you go by the canon, you actually get additional benefits because overall, the canon Skybreakers get more, right? Because the only thing you're sacrificing with the first ideal is how soon you get to use your Stormlight abilities and the Gravity Surge, and I guess as well the Division Surge. but you gain extra health and you gain extra focus. And by the time you speak your second ideal, then you can use gravity and your investiture. And then the third ideal, you get division. Now, in the lore, and you may have noticed this in the Dustbringer video, if you watched that, if you haven't, I recommend doing so. Division is powerful. Now, before I was kind of just rambling on. Division doesn't allow you to separate or to divide atoms, but you can atomize things. You can break things down to an atomic level. It's powerful, and it was the force that destroyed the planet Ashen. Now, if you don't know what that is, keep reading the books. So it's reasonable that the Skybreakers, who are the most concerned about justice and power and fairness, would get division so late. But the third ideal requires you to be at least tier 3. My apologies, at least tier 2. It says prerequisite level 8 plus speak the second ideal. So that's halfway through the second tier in the game before you get to the third tier. So it's a ways out, but you could feasibly get there in not a bad number of levels, though that is, a lot of time to get powers that a lot of the other Radiants aren't getting. So that is purely if you want to play by the canon, but if you are playing by canon, you do get some statistical advantages, which is kind of cool. And something I really like about the Cosmere game, because it is so true to the source, but it doesn't force you to be restricted. The canon stuff is not the core way you're supposed to play the game. It's just an example of how you can play. And even in the world setting, the canon way is only because that's how the high spren that work with Nail agree how it should be, and spren kind of determine when you can use your powers and get your ideals and all that kind of stuff. But a spren that is not under Nail in a different order of Skybreakers will probably be a lot looser with this, so don't let it restrict your gameplay. But if you want to really lean into the canon, it's got some really cool stuff. So I like how this game really respects the lore and the narrative and gives options for role-playing it and actual benefits for doing so. I think that's really cool. So as we did with the Dustbringers, let's talk about some other ideals. So after you speak the first ideal, you can speak the second ideal, which is, I swear to seek justice, to let it guide me until I find a more perfect ideal. So this is a very interesting one because it seems very obvious at first, right? I will seek justice and let it guide me. That means you are going to let justice happen and you're going to follow through with justice as long as it happens within the law, but that doesn't mean you might not necessarily use loopholes in the law to punish unjust individuals. It's very interesting, but when it says, until I find my more perfect ideal, that is specifically for lore reasons, because speaking your later ideals determine and can vastly change what you determine to be just or unjust. And we might as well just talk about the third ideal with that. So the third ideal is, I swear to follow blank. You swear an ideal to give a pledge to a singular authority, and you will follow that authority no matter what. You will follow them no matter if the actions seem just, unjust. In some cases, you could even pledge your fealty to a criminal organization if you so choose, and if your high spren, of course, so allows. So this is very interesting, and it completely changes how you might play the game. And so narratively speaking, Skybreakers are super cool because as you're playing the game, what your character perceives as justice and law and rule might change dramatically, which is super cool. And more specifically, this is a pursuit. You want to find an authority that you want to follow and then swear a third ideal to. So before you even think about swearing your third ideal, you need to find that authority and find them, like, narratively speaking. Now, of course, if you're playing in a little bit of a looser game, then this authority can just be the group leader if you really want to. Like, your table can make it work. Don't let the idea of the ideals really constrain your group. Play in a way that is most fun for you. This is mostly for the people who want to get more depth and more oomph for the role play, because It's so rare to find games that really repay proper roleplay that it's really hard not to lean into it, if I'm going to be honest about it. Now, the fourth ideal, being unique as many of them are, is more even particularly unique for the Skybreakers because you swear your fourth ideal just out the gate. You don't have to work up to it like many other ideals because the fourth ideal for Skybreakers is the ideal of Crusade. So you go on a pilgrimage of some kind to right injustices, to right a particular wrong that is important to you in your journey. So slaying an evil tyrant king who gets away with breaking the law all the time might very well be your crusade. And so you get the benefits of your fourth ideal earlier than some other radiant paths, but mostly because you're about to undertake a very personal and a very typically dangerous journey, or at least a very particularly difficult journey, as sometimes getting justice means playing by the rules, and that can be difficult if the deck is stacked against you. So, High Spren. I mentioned them several times before, but these are the core Spren for the Skybreakers. Let's talk about them just a little bit here. So High Spren are really cool because in the physical realm, High Spren appear as rips in the fabric of space, revealing stars and galaxies behind like this. It's super cool, super aesthetic. High Spren are also really weird because High Spren oftentimes just go by names that are just straightforward like number sequences. Like you can have a High Spren named 1234 or O-11 or something like that. It's very peculiar. Now, of course, in a setting like this, and it's been proven time and time again, that you can have High Spren who have more interesting names. That can be a thing. You can have a High Spren who doesn't go by the normal code and wants to do something else. Like Spren, even though they're more pulled towards their instincts than, say, a human would be, they can be flexible with it. So if you don't want to have a High Spren named 911, you can definitely change their name if in your game. I mean, your GM at least should allow you to. High Spren also tend to be the most high-strung of the Spren types, and in the material plane, High Spren are quite interesting. Now, in the cognitive realm, High Spren have kind of the same appearance, only in a more humanoid form, having that same kind of rip in reality kind of aesthetic, but now in the profile of a person. I actually, in the book, couldn't find the actual cognitive realm version, so I might provide other art here, or I might just be looking like an idiot motioning to nothing. Who knows? We'll see how the editing goes. But they are very interesting because, again, it's that same kind of aesthetic, though they have that kind of panorama effect where, or not panorama, there's a certain name for it, but I can't think of it, where, you know, they walk, and as they walk, the stars don't stay stationary, but it's almost as if you're looking through a moving window into, like, outer space. It's super cool. So High Spren are really, really interesting. Though, honestly, I would say by how they're run in the books, they can be a very rigid, kind of strict part of your character. So, you know, be flexible, have fun with it. Not every High Spren is working for now, and the High Spren are capable of free thought like any other sentient form of life. So, you know. But let's go ahead and look at the powers. Again, I know you guys put up with a lot just to get to this part of the video, but for me, the roleplay means as much as the mechanics. So, that being said, for now, the second half of the video, we're going to be talking about the mechanical benefits. And starting off with the High Spren bond. Now, again, you're going to see a lot of stuff here that you've recognized from the Dustbringers, and that's because most Spren bonds are the same, except for the combo ability that they have. And for Skybreakers specifically, it's Soaring Destruction. Now, this is a free action you can take. So after a move with a basic lashing, which we'll get to that here in a moment, you can spend one focus to gain an action for the use of division or its talents. So more or less how this works is when you move through flights, you can spend a focus to gain an action to use your destructive powers for. This makes Skybreakers really, really good at being very mobile in combat and incredibly destructive, gaining extra action economy to do extra damage with their division powers, which, if you watch my Dustbringer videos, you know is very, very good. Other than that, you're going to see a lot of the same kind of stuff here that you saw with the other one, so I'm not going to go too much into it. But let's go ahead and talk about the surges. So, Division. I talked about this in Dustbringer, so I'm going to just mention a lot of the same stuff again because this might be the first time a particular person is watching a video trying to find their radiant path. So, Division is essentially atomizing objects. When you use Division, you make a melee division attack against the spiritual defense of a target, and you roll spiritual damage at base 3d4 spiritual damage. Now, if this damage reduces the target to 0 HP, they crumble into dust and just immediately die. No saves, nothing can bring them back. Now, the die size increases as your division talent or as your division skill increases as well. As in Cosmere, your powers gain skills so you can get better at them and do more damage with them. And another interesting thing, Division's core stat is intellect. So the more intelligent your character is, the better you are at atomizing people, which I love this very pro-nerd approach Cosmere's got going here. Now, to use your surge, it's going to be 2 actions, so that's very costly, but as a Skybreaker, as long as you spent an action to move, you essentially can use the 2-action Division surge for one action, or you can consider it, you get to move and use it for the same 2-action cost, which is really, really good and even better with some of the talents we're going to be looking at here in a moment. But let's talk about the spiritual defense part, right? So in this game, you have 3 types of defenses. You have your physical defense, cognitive defense, and spiritual defense. Now, most attacks in the game apply against a physical attack, and this goes against armor and the enemy's ability to dodge and whatever. But Division doesn't work that way. Division attacks their spiritual defense. So if they are not very spiritually adept, which in this case means they don't have a lot of like awareness or perceptive abilities, for instance, then they're going to just be atomized before they even realize what's going on. And spirit damage cannot be deflected by normal armor types. The only types of armor in the game currently that can really deflect any kind of spiritual damage are shard plate or like half shard stuff. Like, it's very, very difficult. So you can consider Division to mostly be doing true damage against targets that the beefier and dumber they are, the more unlikely they are to get around it, making Division users, specifically Dustbringers and Skybreakers, incredibly dangerous opponents to face off against. And as well, you can also use Division against the environment. You can touch an object and destroy it. You spend investiture equal to the number of surge ranks required to affect the size of the target. And we got this nice graph here that tells us exactly how big of an area we can affect with our Division. And what's even more interesting about this is our Division is completely within our control. So we don't have to destroy and completely atomize a whole object. We can carve letters into stone with Division. We can have very delicate work, or we could take a corner of a pillar, for instance, and just remove enough from that pillar to cause it to fall under its own weight. So this can be used pretty ingeniously, if I'm going to be honest. But if you're using this on objects during combat or any kind of stressful situation, then you need to use Division under pressure, which means you need to hit a certain DC, you making a Division intellect roll versus a DC as determined by this table here. And if we're going to be honest, it's incredibly hard to destroy the things we're going to really want to destroy in combat, at least to start off with. In the best case, when you get access to Division, if you're not going by canon, your modifier is at best looking like possibly a +5, right? So a +5, meaning to destroy things like metal, stone, or crystal, probably one of the most common things you're going to want to destroy, you need to roll a 15 or higher, which is pretty difficult. Now, as the game progresses, you get to higher tiers and can have more points invested in division. That's going to become a lot easier, but just know early in the game, if you're under pressure, your division powers aren't going to be able to solve necessarily every single problem. So now that we know what division does, let's go ahead and take a look at its talents. And one of the first talents they have, bodily decay, is really good because when you hit with a division attack, you can spend an opportunity to cause one target of the attack to suffer an injury. This is an ongoing effect that will affect them essentially for the rest of the combat unless they have some kind of special healing, and it is devastating. Now, this, because it uses opportunities specifically, means agents make really good Skybreakers because you get the ability as an agent, if you take the right talents, to just make to raise the stakes yourself and sometimes even just change the results straight to an opportunity. So an agent makes a really good Skybreaker just because of bodily decay alone. Next down the list, we have Igniting Division. Now, Igniting Division, you can spend one or more investiture to essentially alight a target and its space on fire, dealing ongoing damage equal to your division modifier. Your division modifier is going to be, again, that intellect plus division. So at the earliest you can get this, very typically you can do 5 damage all round. Now, an enemy can attempt to pat you out or pat the target out and get rid of this igniting division a little bit earlier, but still that's wasting actions, and this has a really high chance of just dealing extra damage or just blocking off areas of space. Very particularly good. Gout of Flame is just area division attack. It's a bigger area affecting one size larger than you normally could, which is going to be very good, and it does cost 3 investiture, which is very expensive, and that actually plays into a weakness of the Skybreakers, but we'll get to that in a little bit. So Gout of Flame is really, really good if you have multiple targets. Now, this is indiscriminate. All targets in the space. So make sure your allies are not in this area, but otherwise Gout of Flame is going to be really good, more specifically as a Skybreaker, because Skybreakers have flight. They have gravity as one of their major power sets, which means they are going to very often be out of the reach of the enemies, but it's going to be more difficult for them to use division because division typically is a melee attack. With Gout of Flame, you can extend that to a pretty big area, allowing you to affect targets 10 feet away from you or more. And last in this column here, we have Devastating Division. When you roll damage for division, roll an additional damage die. So that 3d4 I mentioned before is now 4d4. And I didn't emphasize before, but every time you put skill points into your division, that die increases by a step. So with 2 ranks, it does 3d6 or 4d6 with Devastating Division. With 3 ranks, 4d8, and so on and so forth, up to d12s at 5th rank, which is incredibly strong. So yeah, and it's all spirit damage, as I mentioned before. So Devastating Division just increases how much damage we can do. And actually, this is a really good point to mention as well, that because division is considered a melee attack, it can graze. And considering probably a good portion of the damage is coming straight from the dice roll, since you roll so many dice, especially with Devastating Division, if you graze the enemy by spending a focus point, which, hey, guess what? If you go Cannon Skybreaker, you have more focus. But yeah, you spend a focus to just hit the enemy with the dice. You're going to be doing a lot of damage, and you don't even need to hit the enemy, making division, again, very, very devastating, and making this perfect for either warrior or hunter paths because they can get combat training, which allows you to graze once per round for free without spending a focus. That's really, really strong. So if you want to play the ultimate destructive character, warrior path or hunter path into Skybreaker or Dustbringer, and you're going to be able to bring the hurt, and the enemies are going to have very little they can do to stop you. All right, on the other side of the column here, we have Eroding Escape. You spend 1 or more investiture to and a restraining or immobilizing effect. Now, this might not necessarily completely destroy whatever's restraining you, but destroy it just enough for you to wiggle free. So this is mostly for like other kinds of effects, but it can even be for things like grapples, though it doesn't really mention specifically if you're being restrained by a grapple, what happens. So by what the intent of the game seems to be is if someone is grappling you, you begin eroding away at them, causing them to reflexively, retract their hand, or even just removing the friction points essentially. So they take insignificant amounts of damage, but you're able to break free. It's very, very good, especially good because unlike Dustbringers, Skybreakers don't have the ability to just become super slippery and slip out of someone's grasp. So eroding escape can be the only way you might be able to escape from these kind of situations. Next, we have Spark Sending, and honestly, these next couple feats are going to be really bad for Skybreakers because Spark Sending allows you to use your division at 20 feet, but you need to be in contact with a solid surface. Skybreakers want to be flying a lot because that's just where they're strongest. So you're not going to be in contact with the solid surface to send your division through. That doesn't mean you can't, but it does play kind of counterintuitive to how our other surge works. And even more so for Inescapable Spark, because this gives you a range equal to your Sprenbon, which can be up to 100 feet, which is really good, and can even ignore line of sight, allowing you to, say, put your hands on a shield wall, and then your division flies around to the other side, and then, of course, can be used with Gout of Flame to cause an explosion on the other side. So, yeah, that's really good. Also, enemies can no longer brace against your division. Now, that is generally good even if you're flying, because enemies could normally brace against your Gout of Flame, for instance. Now they can't, which is good. And then the last bit here is probably the best part, which is Unleashed Entropy. Your base division skill, so you can't use Gout of Flame or anything, is 1 action fewer. And additionally, your DCs for using division under pressure are reduced by 5, which is insanely good. So this is actually really, really good for us specifically, because as a Skybreaker, as long as we're moving, we can use our combo ability to spend focus to essentially gain an action, which we could then just use for division. So essentially, we could use our base division for essentially like no additional actions other than the movement cost, which is really, really good. So that being said, division, really good, as I mentioned in Dustbringer, but let's go ahead and talk about gravity, because gravity is going to make this a particularly fun surge for people who want to express a level of mastery. So gravitation is, in my own opinion, the most different than how it works in the book. And you're going to see something called lashings. Lashings were an indication in the Stormlight books of like attaching a power to a thing. You can consider like an imaginary whip of light, right? Every time that whip would strike an object, it would gain gravity or whatever in a direction of your choice. So a basic lashing is enough to move either yourself or an object up to your gravitation skill in a particular direction. And as long as this object or yourself were infused, it would keep going in that direction as long as you're spending an investiture each round. Now, in the books, flight was more of a very precise use of these lashings, moving yourself or removing gravity in certain ways, and it made it much more complicated but interesting. In the game, it's a lot more basic. You lash a thing and it moves in a direction, and unless you have the talent for it, you can't actually apply multiple basic lashings to a thing to make it fly essentially further or faster. As you start off with your gravitation powers, which if you're going by canon wouldn't be until the second ideal, but first ideal with the base rules, you have a gravitation rate of 25 feet. So essentially, when you use gravitation on yourself, you can fly at a rate of 25 feet. Now, you don't need to make any special checks in order to fly in this way, unless you're doing something particularly difficult, like flying through a tight space or making a sudden 90-degree turn at the last second, in which case you'll need to make a gravitation check against a DC determined by your GM, and gravitation uses awareness. Now, that's really good for us, for our Skybreaker here, because awareness is going to hopefully apply to our investiture, which is going to be one of the weaknesses of the Skybreakers. So as a Skybreaker, you're going to be split between using your investiture, which you start with a number of points equal of either 2 plus your awareness or your presence, whichever is higher. So starting off, you can only really have a max investiture of +5, and that's if you're going whole hog into it. Skybreaker at least has a really good reason, since their gravitation powers are based on awareness. So this is really good, except you're going to be using your flight, and every round you're using your flight, you're spending 1 point of investiture minimum, and that's not including doing things like sending enemies flying away into the stratosphere, which is something we're going to talk about here in just a moment. And, of course, your division powers, which things like Gout of Flame is just very expensive. And if you want to use igniting division to light them on fire, well, you want to spend extra investiture to make them on fire for more rounds. So the Skybreakers specifically have a very, very tight purse when it comes to using their investiture, because you fly around a little too much and then you can't use any of your other abilities until you breathe in more Stormlight, and breathing in Stormlight is 2 actions. So keeping that in mind, this is going to sound really, really good, but just remember you are dividing the number of points you're spending around between these 2 surges. So yeah, it gets a little rough. But anyway, so I mentioned before, you can invest yourself with your gravitation power to give you flight, and then it's 1 per round. But for other objects, remember that table about areas for investiture that we talked about before? Well, here it is again. This can determine the size of the thing that you're moving based on your current ranks in gravity. So you can't even move enemies until you have at least 2 ranks in gravitation. Now, that's not too difficult, but just something I figured I'd mention. Now, when you target another character, if they're willing, then you can give an ally flight for the same type of duration based on the amount of investiture you put into them. And if you're using this on an enemy, you're going to need to make a gravitation test using your gravitation ranks plus awareness against their physical defense. And on success, you spend a minimum of 1 investiture, and you will gain the ability to spend extra investiture to move the target in a direction of your choice, which can be up specifically, probably up a lot of the times, at a rate of your gravitation per round. So that's really devastating. Now, while the enemy is flying in this way, they're considered restrained, meaning they cannot move under their own volition. But if they pass by any kind of object that they can potentially grab onto, then they can take the avoid danger reaction to make an agility test opposed by your gravitation score. And if they succeed, then they stop moving as they're just grabbed onto an object, and then they are there until your power essentially ceases. So as you can see here, Skybreakers are incredibly devastating. Not only do they get division, but they get gravity, allowing them to have ultimate mobility, right? Because flight is the ultimate form of mobility in most scenarios, unless it's considered swimming. And even then, you can actually use gravity underwater, which is pretty fun too. But yeah, so you can maneuver around enemies, and not only that, but with melee attacks, you can either, atomize them or send them flying into space, in which after the lashing ends, they drop to the ground at the standard rate for falling, which is pretty devastating. And that's base. Let's look at the talents because it makes it even better. So starting off, we get Flying Ace. Flying Ace is really good because, 1, it increases your gravitation rate to 40 feet. It just says that flat. It's just your gravitation rate becomes 40 feet, not for your movements, it just becomes 40 feet. So that means when you use your gravitation power on anyone else, they also fly away at a rate of 40 feet. which is devastating. That's really, really strong. I don't know if they even intended that, honestly, but hey, here we are. I mean, to be fair, gravitation's already really strong, so whatever. But in addition to this, you can spend one focus to make a melee weapon attack during this flight. And it's at any point during the flight. It's not just, at the end of it like it normally would be. You could fly 10 feet, hit someone, and then fly 30 feet, doing essentially a flyby, which is very, very powerful. Now, I actually had to go back and re-record this particular part because I misunderstood Flying Ace. This does not count as a move action. Flying Ace is its own individual action. So as a part of Flying Ace, you fly up to a distance equal to your gravitation rate. That does not mean you take a move action, which means it does not stack with the Skybreaker combo ability of then allowing you to use a division attack at one action less. So a little unfortunate, but honestly, when I thought it worked that way, that was super strong, so strong. So it doesn't necessarily work that way, but Flying Ace is still really good. It improves your gravitation power. It gives you unparalleled maneuverability on the battlefield. Like you can fly in and out of an enemy's reach, and unless they use a reaction to try to strike you, there's nothing they can do about it. They're not going to be able to reach you unless they have a bow or something like that. And that's just not going to be super likely in a lot of situations. So yeah, Flying Ace is really good, though I would say generally because of its overall function, you're probably not going to be using Flying Ace and your division powers, maybe, but Flying Ace I feel like works a lot better if you're going whole hog into gravitation. But you could still use Flying Ace to fly, strike an enemy, and then position yourself to then use a division attack. Granted, it will be very expensive that round to use the investiture, and especially if you're using like Gout of Flame, which is the best one for using it during flight, it's going to be super expensive. So honestly, Flying Ace is mostly going to be for the gravitation specific Skybreakers, but hey, you might have a more individual play style, and I would be interested to see if you guys have any cool like combos that your Skybreakers can do. The next talent we have here is Stable Flight, which is while you maintain a basic lashing on yourself, so while you're spending investiture for your gravity every round, essentially, your range attacks don't gain disadvantage due to flying or unstable footing, which is okay if you're planning on doing the pretty much like the optimal combat efficiency build of flying out of enemies' reach and using a bow. By the way, really sucks because Flying Ace only applies to melee attacks, so we can't move and attack with a ranged weapon at some point during the flight, but we can do so with a melee weapon. I think that's a little not good, if I'm going to be honest. I think that's a poor design philosophy there. I think it should apply to ranged weapons, and in my games, it probably will. Is that very strong? Yes, but you're Radiance. You're supposed to be very strong. Maybe it's a balance thing. I'm not 100% sure. I don't know how you really consider balance, considering the fact that Skybreakers have the ultimate combat advantage. So, yeah, Stable Flight is kind of okay, if I'm going to be honest. It doesn't play into Flying Ace that well, and you're only going to take Stable Flight so you can take the next talent, Group Flight. Now, Group Flight allows you to, when you use a basic lashing out of combat, you can infuse an additional number of characters up to your gravitation ranks, so that gravitation skill, without spending additional investiture. Now, you still need to spend one investiture per round to maintain all of those people, but still, if you're going to do 3 people, for instance, or 2 people plus yourself, then it's the 1 point plus 1 every round, which is really good. And Group Flight is, well, very, very solid because it's gives your allies the same advantage you have in combat. Now, Aerial Squadron, its main function is mostly just to allow you to use Group Flight in combat. So this is very much the natural next talent you're going to select after taking group flight. Now, the other side of the chart I'm going to say is way more interesting. So starting off with Gravitational Slam, you use a basic lashing to collide a target with a solid surface, dealing a D4 impact damage per 10 feet moved. The target can attempt to prevent this by using avoid damage, or not prevent this, but they can reduce it in half if they make a successful avoid damage reaction by making an agility test opposed by your gravitation test. And this actually heightens as well with your gravitation. So the die size increases with each gravitation rank. So at 2 ranks, it's going to be D6s and so on and so forth. So 3 ranks, D8s, 4 ranks, D10s. So it's really good. Gravitational Slam is the perfect, I touch a person and they fall on the wall to the side, right? And you want to get at least 20 feet so that you can roll an additional die with it. And they just take the damage. This isn't an attack. The target just takes that damage. Now, this can be deflected, but still really, really good. Then we have multiple lashings. I didn't mention this one before. So when you move an unwilling character with gravitation, you can infuse investiture up to your ranks in gravitation. So 2 points at 2 ranks, 3 points at 3 ranks to prolong the effect. And essentially how this one works is they fly at your gravitation rate for a number of rounds equal to the number of extra investiture up to your ranks you infuse into them, which means, in all honesty, once you're at 3 ranks in gravitation, that enemy is effectively out of the combat, and that's if they manage to survive the fall after the infusion ends. So yeah, multiple lashings is probably going to be a must take. Then we have Lashing Shot, one I actually really, really like, and one that, again, kind of contradicts doesn't contradict, but it kind of... So one of the cool things when you're reading the books is that really there's no size limits to what you can really invest into other than how much investiture you have. So you could, for instance, take a giant statue that is not like bolted to the floor or anything and touch it, and it would fall in a direction typically into an opponent, dealing damage. Now, unfortunately, with gravitation as it is just base, objects can't fly into people at a rate that would damage them. You know what I mean? So that's kind of unfortunate, but Lashing Shot changes that. So for 2 actions, you touch an unattended object of a size you can affect with your ranks in gravitation, and then you propel that object at a target in your line of effect, spending investiture equal to the distance to the target divided by your gravitation rounded up. Now, this is a very, very confusing way of putting this. So and this is for balancing purposes, it makes no sense, and I kind of hate how this one is written. So you spend investiture equal to the distance to the target divided by your gravitation rate. So this is spaces in a combat grid, so 5-foot spaces. So if an enemy is 10 feet away, they're 2 spaces away, right? So if you have 1 gravitation rank, it will cost you 2 points of investiture to fly or to send that object to them, because it's 1 divided by 2 spaces essentially, so 2, right? Or sorry, 2 divided by 1, so 2. But if you have 2 points of investiture, then it's 2 divided by 2, which is 1. And you always round up. So if they're at 10 feet and you have 4 ranks, for instance, then it's 2 divided by 4.5 is so 1 rank. So yeah, it's very, very confusing. This one is going to get people mixed up a lot, and I don't like it. I don't like how it's written. I don't like how it's overall designed. In all honesty, I would have taken Lashing Shot to allow you to do, damage based on the size of the object you're affecting, and just be like a flat 3 points, right? Which, by the way, the size of the object doesn't matter for what damage you deal, because you make a gravitation attack against the physical defense of the target, so they can still dodge after all this math and everything, and you roll 2d4 impact damage. So no matter how far it falls, how big it is, it's 2d4 impact damage. Now, the size of the damage does increase by your gravitation rank, so at 2 ranks it's d6s, and at 3 ranks it's D8s. But yeah, so I don't like Lashing Shot. I don't like how it works at all, because all things considered, whatever you use doesn't matter. A spoon does as much as like a statue does falling on a target, and you have to do a bunch of weird math in order to make this one work. So Lashing Shot, I like the idea of, because right, it's just like you take a pebble, shoot this with hypergravity, and it falls into someone, hurts them. That's really cool. I don't like the fact that that same pebble does the same amount of damage as massive statue tumbling across the floor and hitting people. So if you want my homebrew for this one specifically, I would make it be the damage is based on the size of the object that you're using. So it works damage-wise more or less the same here, except you need big objects to do big damage, more or less. And in order to use the lashing, I would even just make it, honestly, 1 investiture. Making it additional investiture to do this kind of thing, with the 2 action cost in addition, feels a little rough. If that feels too light on you, do 2 or 3 investiture and you're solid. I mean, like 3 investiture can get up to 30 feet away anyway, as long as you have 2 ranks. So it makes a lot of sense. The only time this really doesn't work in a lot of combat scenarios is if you're trying to send something super far away. So yeah. And actually, no, you know what? I have a better homebrew. I just thought about it. You can only affect a target within your gravitation range. Boom, there you go. So it's just the 1 investiture, but you have a range equal to your gravitation rate, which is 25 feet or 40 feet if you have combat ace or flying ace. So I like that a little bit better. But yeah, Lashing Shot, really cool in theory. I think very bad in practice. And the last feat, I know this video has been going on a little bit long. I kind of went on a bit of a rant. We have Master of the Skies. So while you have investiture, you're always infused with gravitation. Now, if you watch the Dustbringer video, this one will look very similar to how abrasion works, and it works exactly the same. So as long as you're invested, which means as long as you've breathed in Stormlight, your character is, for the sakes of gravity, always flying. You're always considered flying whenever you have investiture in you, even if you're not actually flying at the time, but you're considered have the capable of and to get the benefit of your flight, or while being invested anyway. So, and I guess that is considered just always having a basic lashing on yourself, which is, again, the terminology here matches the books, is not going to be good for new players. So yeah, but yeah, so I really do like the Skybreakers. I love Gravitation, and I love Division, obviously. The thing with Skybreakers, and the reason why I think overall Dustbringers are just a little bit stronger, is like a Dustbringer optimally just needs to infuse themselves with abrasion, and then they're good to go, and then they can spend all other investiture on using Division. Now, granted, in order to maintain the abrasion on you, yes, it is still 1 investiture per round, but you can just have your abrasion off if you no longer need to move, and that's not a problem. Doing that while flying is a lot harder. And also, in addition to that, while abrasion can be fun, making enemies slip and fall prone and everything like that, honestly, there are just much cheaper ways to doing that in the game, like using your actual abilities to knock an enemy prone, strength, all that kind of stuff. While Skybreakers, like, you're going to be tempted to send enemies flying off because, honestly, yeah, sure, Division on a target does a lot of damage, but because the Cosmere RPG kind of has an HP scaling problem, I would say, roughly, because, like, by the time you get to the 2nd rank, enemies are going to have, like, 50 plus HP. So even if you have a decent division at that rate, you're still going to be doing mostly closer to, like, 10, maybe 20 at most damage per round. Using gravitation on the enemy is just going to take them out of the combat, and then they're going to fly as high as you would put investiture into them if you have multiple lashings, and then they're going to fall and probably die anyway, or take a lot of damage. So, that being said, I feel like the Skybreaker is really, really good, but you do need to be very smart when you're playing them, which I guess, again, makes a little bit of sense since we're using Division anyway, because you have such strategic advantages in combat. You can fly and move in 3 dimensions when most people can't. You have the ability to just destroy things that are in your way, and you can use your flight to great effects or just completely remove enemies from a combat scenario, which is very devastating. Again, like, this game's not designed to be super balanced, okay? Gravity alone is probably one of the strongest abilities, because just the ability to just essentially banish an enemy for a certain number of turns is very strong, and they still take damage potentially after that, and they're just kind of like a sitting duck because they're restrained. That's so good. Like, you might not even really need division to be a threat on the battlefield. But yeah, the Skybreakers are very needy. You need high awareness, because you need every point of investiture you can manage. And if you want to do the most damaging effects, you're going to want to have a lot of focus as well, which is going to take a lot of your will. So, a lot of stat requirements, a lot of kind of things. The Skybreakers are really cool. I love them narratively and everything like that. It's just mechanically, they require a little bit more thought than Dustbringers do. So if you want to do Ultimate Destruction, go Dustbringer. But if you want to have like a very solid, like, strategic advantage in most combat scenarios, then I guarantee Skybreaker is going to be better, because you can lay on the hurt and you can just have superior positioning at all times. But that's just my thoughts on the Skybreakers. Please let me know your thoughts down in the comments below as well. Don't forget your Radiant orders, because I definitely will make videos for y'all if you tell me what Radiant orders you want me to do next. And, let me know if I was wrong about anything. I'm always open to such things. But that's going to be it for me. Thank y'all so much for watching. Good luck with your games. Leave the bad luck to me. And I'll see y'all next time. Bye.